Hi, I'm Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor has been the definitive source dedicated to recognizing achievement, delivering unrivaled thought leadership, and connecting the world's mergers and acquisitions elite. We help you sharpen your edge and accelerate your success in deal making. Whether you're an ambitious new player or a market veteran, this podcast provides masterclass strategies, unvarnished stories, and vital lessons from the industry's influential figures. Before we launch into this episode, be sure to follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and subscribe to our essential M&A Alerts email newsletter. Find all the links below. Your engagement fuels the deal-making community. Now let's get into the transaction.
So tonight it'll be my pleasure to give leadership awards to Kevyn and to Jim, and a Lifetime Achievement Award to David, which just means he's old like me. So sorry, David, but that's no. Yeah, you are actually, sir. So tonight we'll dress up and we'll give them the awards. What we do at this lunch event every year is actually try to get behind the awards and behind the resumes and talk about the people. Because the interesting thing, it's always to me, and those of you who've heard me talk about this before, the really important thing in life are people's stories. When you learn people's stories, you learn about them, you learn about how to create relationships, you learn how to bridge transactions, you learn how to do deals. It's all about people's stories. And these three have some extraordinary stories and how they got to where they are today. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so trying to sort of hear their stories as we go through there. And so, Kevyn, you and I went to the same law school, I think, right? Not too many years apart from each other. But why don't let's go back and sort of start there when you were thinking about what you were going to do and what kind of a career you were going to have, and just start talking from those early days. So you think you graduated, you know, if I remember I never made it to my law school graduation, but I think they were University of Michigan holds them in May. And my recollection is you went to work like a day or two after you graduated.
I did. I went to work a day or two after I graduated because I was broke. I graduated May 12th, and I started working May 14th and spent the first week living off my Amoco credit card, eating Vienna sausages and beans and weenies over at the Amoco station. But I went to law school because I was a budding socialist. I had studied Trotsky's concept of intrism, that you go in two systems to get the jackbooted foot of the running dog capitalist devil off the neck of the proletariat so they can control the true means of their production and succession and liberate themselves from the oppressive forces of capitalism, and to strike down the man. I became the man, okay, in a sense. But that's why I went to law school and then got out. and after my first year of clerkship, we were at the Miami Club down in Miami, City Club in Miami, and went out on Gene Stearns and Stearns and Miller's yacht and played some golf. I was looking around, this capitalist dog running devil thing ain't so bad. I think I can get used to it. So that's how I went from being a budding socialist into corporate law 2 days after I graduated.
And like I think David, we'll talk to you in just a minute, and we'll get to Jim after that. But you started out in a boutique, right? Kevyn, you started out in a boutique, right?
Yeah, I did.
David did too. We'll get to David's story in the same thing. But why the boutique? And other than you like South Florida, I understand that. But
I wanted to come home, practice law. I got my first jury trial 6 months after I graduated. And it was just a stepping stone to me running for Senate in the state of Florida. There were 24 attorneys at Archie Freed Stearns at the time, and they were doing takeovers and banking law, and that was sort of the specialty I was looking forward to.
David, you also started your background, law school to a boutique early on.
Correct. I graduated from law school, Case West Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I grew up. In 1979, as my mother, I'll never forget it, told me at my graduation, how does it feel to graduate magna cum nothing? And I was magna cum nothing graduate, no good grades or anything like that. I was never a good student, and I had no job. So that was my start. And so about a job, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do whatever law the firm that offers me a job does. That was my aspiration. And sure enough, I found my way to Chicago and a firm called Nachman, Munitz and Zweig, which, this is in the era where restructuring work was done entirely by the boutiques, so the big firms wouldn't dirty their hands with bankruptcy back in those days. And, that's where I began.
Yeah. We make it sound like you got there by mistake, but it wasn't really a mistake, right? I mean, one of the things I think for those of us who are of the age of having grown up in the late 70s and graduated from law school there and ended up doing something in the restructuring world, it had a lot to do with preparation meeting the opportunity of the bankruptcy code, right? And I think you saw something at the time, something clicked in your head about bankruptcy, I think, because you got interested in it.
Jack, you always, from the first time I've met you, have given me too much credit. And you haven't stopped doing that. So I didn't take bankruptcy in law school. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't take it because the guy that taught bankruptcy at Case Western Reserve was the hardest grader in the school, and so I'm not taking bankruptcy with that guy. So and this is kind of the miracle, you talk about the serendipity of life. For me, I think it's kind of the miracle of life. I didn't even know what Chapter 11 was. And so how did I get hired by this really good law firm in Chicago that did nothing but Chapter 11s, but somehow they hired me. And that became the rest of my life.
Well, interesting. Neither did I. I was someone who, when I was, I didn't want to go to law school. My dad made me do it. I said that Kevin and I sort of went to Michigan Law School together. He actually attended Michigan Law School. I actually borrowed money from my grandmother, bought a house in the Old West Side, leased to undergraduates, and had a whole other undergraduate experience for 3 years, and went to maybe 20% of my classes. Right now, Michigan has generously rewritten that history over the years, but and that was added by the fact that I somehow ended up with a permanent job after my first year, meaning I had no interest in going and spending the law school, took no bankruptcy courses, no commercial transaction courses. But when I went to that law firm, who, by the way, fired me in 18 months, but while I was there, I got exposed to bankruptcy, right? And I realized, right, that this code, this new thing, right, was going to change capital markets, right? And, you say I give you too much credit, but actually within the first couple of years, I know your history. Within the first couple of years, you figured the same thing out, right? And so it didn't take you very long when you were at Nachman to sort of understand what was happening.
From the first day, I loved it. And when I talk about my life, sometimes I say that was the day, the Wizard of Oz, when it goes from black and white to color, that was the day where my life went from black and white to color, because everything I learned about it fascinated me. I loved everything about it. I loved the people that were involved in it. Honestly, I moved to Chicago. I didn't know anybody. Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I was sad that I had to wait 2 days to, come back into the office. It was really from the get-go. I found the restructuring, or the practice of bankruptcy law, because back then there was really no restructuring. Restructuring was bankruptcy, to be completely absorbing in every way.
So Jim, you have an interesting background in that you have been one of those people. But we go through some of Kevin's history, David's history, and they've gone to 3, 4, 5, 6 different things maybe in their lives. You've done one thing, in multiple different flavors of it, with the same people for your entire career after leaving Harvard, right? And so talk a little bit about that, because the firms had different names as you jump from one to another, but the people haven't. And talk a little bit about those relationships and a little bit about what how that's informed your career.
Sure, happy to do that, Jack. I think what I would first say is hearing David's story and Kevin's story, like the same nexus moment, the same explosionary, evolutionary moment that may have happened with the code really was happening around the time that I was leaving my JD MBA program and thinking about credit and thinking about bankruptcy, which was just the growth of the non-regulated lending, the growth of CLOs, the growth of securitized credit, the growth of syndicated loans, creating what was almost I would see as more of a backwater into this huge major asset class. So in my case, to your point, I had, at the time, it was 2000, I was interested in looking in investment banking and restructuring. I can tell you I was one of few people that were actually looking at doing that at that point. Most of my HBS colleagues were thinking about going to Palo Alto and doing, whatever it was, beef.com, beer.com, thinking of something like that, and they saw me as the kid on the short bus, basically, headed to go do Rust Belt restructuring. So joined Wasserstein Perella. Was happy to be there, happy to be part of a restructuring effort there with Henry and Ken, and then to your point, have watched sort of the universe unfold around that group within 2 years of me being there. We had spun out and created Miller Buckfire because it turns out when Wasserstein Perella was subsequently purchased by a German bank that was subsequently purchased by a German insurer, wasn't really a great place to be running a debtor side advisory shop, and we had 10 years of a great run followed by now ownership by Stifel. And I think that's what's kept me, to your point, I have just been able to find new challenges all the time, whether that's working with my clients, working with the engagements, working with new bankers, really training them into the career, and then also figuring out a way to take this wonderful boutique and figure out how to combine it with the capabilities that Stifel had as well too. So for me, it is definitely about the people that I've trained and the people I've worked with, and the opportunity to interact with folks like David and Kevyn. David was the lead partner on my first restructuring assignment, ICG Communications. Yep. It was a good one. And Kevyn, of course, we were tied together at various points around the Detroit restructuring.
Let's talk a little bit about the Detroit restructuring. We were commenting earlier today, we were chatting that, it seems like it was only yesterday when everyone was spending time about Chapter 9s and everyone was going to go into bankruptcy, and, Kevyn had been appointed the emergency manager of Detroit, my hometown, so I paid a lot of attention. I was kind of watching over his shoulder to see what he'd do in my hometown and try to help us along. And you worked really closely. You worked alongside colleagues of yours who were and are passionate about the solvency of municipalities and state governments and how to try to solve those problems. Talk a little bit about, I'll start with you, Kevyn, but I want to come back to Jim. Talk a little bit about that time and a little bit about why aren't we hearing anything about Chapter 9 much today? And I read something on one of my feeds, Jim, you were expressing some unhappiness about the fact that the city of Detroit's paying bonuses to their government employees right now.
The 13th check, the 13th month check came back, but we can talk about that a bit.
So, Kevyn, let's talk about municipals.
Yeah, Jack, you asked that question. I think it's, for me, in my opinion, there are three reasons. Number one, the legal structure, the ecosystem doesn't exist. You have to have authorizing legislation. There have to be provisions in state constitutions to allow the adjustment of executory contracts like pensions and other things. So number one, very few states have that underlying structure. Number two, there has to be a chief executive that's just like a corporation. We brought private sector concepts into the public sector when we did Detroit, and you have to have a chief executive, somebody who's willing in a board. Very few politicians, in my opinion, are willing to acknowledge a situation. Very few are willing to grab it by the horns and decide they're going to run it to ground. There's too much political risk, there's too much financial risk, there's always a risk that in the funded debt community you could have a higher coupon rate. There's just a bunch of risks that scare people away. And then the third reason I think is really political. Oftentimes, especially in municipalities, a lot of your debt has to do with pension and healthcare. Healthcare debt is actually greater than pension funding because healthcare costs are going up higher. And pensions, if you have some form of capital, you can actually have a rate of return. You can invest and cover. And that's what we did in Detroit. We put it into we had an investment advisor, which basically an index the rate of return at 6.75, which is the second lowest rate of return in municipalities. DC is the lowest at 6.5%. The actual rate of return over the past 14 years is 6.77. So it wasn't that we were prescient. We were just thinking, what is a reasonable way to have a rate of return to fully fund these pensions? It sounds like we did it a little bit too good, because now they're going back to the 13th check, which we had abolished back then. But it's only math. The math part and the restructuring part is not necessarily easy, but it's quantifiable. The political and ad hominem emotional aspects are very, very difficult, and I think there are very few chief executives that are willing to take that on.
I would just add, as far as the financial strength of the vast majority of the municipalities that issue debt, they have robust coffers. And I think in many of these situations as well, as Kevin was saying, they would be reliant upon the state to proceed further into a proceeding. But the states are also very capable of finding ways to extend the runway for these municipalities. Now, that being said, there have been, and we have all done, work around tax-exempt debt that has resulted in restructurings, and they're very complex situations because of the nature of the borrowers and the nature of the bondholders. So, everything associated with Puerto Rico, many of the situations where the monolines had insured debt, many project-related financings associated with new energy projects, and other, golf courses, sports facilities, those type opportunities. It's just the massive wave, I think, was something that was interesting to say, but unusual and probably not going to happen. The last thing I would add is I really do not know where we will be a decade now or 2 decades from now when we're looking at the city of Chicago, as well as the county, the transit authority, the public schools, and even the state. Like, how long and how does that city continue to outrun this growing set of obligations that's going to become more and more difficult to fund, and at the same time take care of basic civic services and continue to make Chicago a vibrant place, which it is right now. But there may be some really difficult decisions, or there may not be, and they may produce harder decisions down the line.
So, Kevin, we listened to Jim talk about the fact that he has, again, sort of started out with the same group of people, worked through several firms, now leading Stifel's practice, and going forward. You and David both had different histories in terms of jumping around, but yours is particularly interesting to me because you were this socialist turned capitalist who went and worked at a law firm for 9 years in Florida, and then went to the government for over a decade, right? The FDIC, the RTC, the Executive Office of the United States Trustee, Emergency Manager of Detroit, and now you lead one of the largest law firms in the world, with the U.S. offices for Jones Day. That's an unusual kind of career path. So could you just walk us through a little bit for whatever led you to walk away from private practice to the government and then find your way back to a place like Jones Day?
Well, like David, I'm a guy who can't keep a job, but I grew up in a household where my father was an ex-Army officer, went on to become a teacher. My mother was a school administrator, and they put in me. My uncle was Secretary of Labor for the state of Florida. My other uncle led the Urban League in Orange County here in Florida. And we were brought up to believe in public service, that public service is a calling, and that before you can comment or complain about the way things are working, you have to throw your hat into the ring and give an effort. So I was always drawn to federal service, FDIC, RTC, and the DOJ, because I thought it was a way of giving back. And to be candid about it, I'm going to be honest about it, as an African-American professional in the corporate world, I think I may bring a different perspective when I'm in public service doing things, and I felt it was an obligation for me to go in. Now, it was fun. I went in the FDIC for what I thought was going to be 2 years. They asked me to go over to the RTC, Residence and Trust Corporation, the Savings and Loan Crisis, which I thought was going to be another 2 years. They assigned me to a case, Madison Guarantee Savings and Loans, some of you may remember, out out in Arkansas, Whitewater. That was going to be a 6-month investigation. It was a $52 million thrift. Our delegation of authorities in Washington, D.C. was $75 million. We would have literally, at RTC, we wrote those off every day. We would have put into conservatorship, marshaled the assets, and sold it off. The only reason it came into D.C. was a concerned guy who was aspirations of being a president called Bill Clinton. We opened an investigation. It gained legs, 6 years of an investigation, $55 million of costs. We could have recapitalized Madison Guaranty Savings and Loan and declared a dividend for the investigation that eventually found that they had not committed some of the acts that they were accused of. But in dealing with independent counsel FIS, independent counsel STAR, House Majority, House Minority, different hearings, investigations, it's one of those things you can't just walk away from as it was evolving. And then when I went over to Executive Office U.S. Trustees of DOJ, because Jerry Patchen, my mentor, who was from Case Western Reserve, and as you know, David, from Cleveland, said, I just need you to help me straighten some things out another 6 months, 6 years. So a lot of these things, it just evolved. That's the way it went. And when Detroit came, it was sort of the thing. It's a city that was 82% African-American. It was down on its luck. And as my managing partner, Steve Brogan, told me, he says, Kevyn, you're one of the handful of African-American restructuring professionals in the country today to help this city. And I don't think your daddy raised you to be a coward. I went home and told my wife that, and she said, he's right. If you don't do it, you'll regret it, and you shouldn't run from it. This is a calling. So I have my Scotch-Irish, South Boston, Southie partner schooling me about what my dad would want me to do, but he was spot on. He was spot on. He's one of the most important people in my life and one of the greatest mentors I've ever had, and he had a vision that I did not see. So sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time with people that are pushing you beyond your comfort level. If you had told me this little hick kid who was playing out here in Loxahatchee Game Preserve, catching bass and carp with my friends and running around barefoot, that I would end up being where I am, was literally impossible. That would have been impossible in 1974 for me to end up where I am. But it's the opportunities that were presented to me mostly by mentors who took an interest in me and pushed me forward that gave me the opportunity to find out who I am. Because, to be honest with you, I'm still eating fried chicken over the kitchen sink every night. Okay? I'm still that guy. Okay, nothing's changed. It's just I've had some opportunities I'm able to benefit from.
So, David, walk us through kind of your path, because and you and I have had a lot of connectivity over the years. We live in Chicago. We've raised our kids together. They went to the same school for a while together. We practiced law together at one point. You and Jamie ended up going to Hilco about 8 or 9 years after I'd spent a few years there with our friend Jeff Heckman. Just walk me through, what went on with your legal career, why you switched to investment banking, and then how you've ended up and what you're doing at Hilco.
Okay, I'll give you let's see if I can condense it down into a couple of minutes of sound bites. So, back to our story, I joined the little firm, bankruptcy explodes, all the big firms decide they want to enter the world of bankruptcy, and so now it's probably 1985 or so, every firm in Chicago that never would have even considered interviewing me is interested in hiring me because I had some bankruptcy experience and they wanted to build bankruptcy groups. So I went from when I joined Knockham Units, and so I was lawyer number 6. So I entered the big firm world, and I just, again, it was Shangri-La for me. So I spent 10 years at Jones Day, talking about mentors, Dave Hyman, a good friend of yours, and the reason that I went to Jones Day. And I joined the bankruptcy group at Jones Day at the perfect moment where I'd say within a year or two of my joining that practice, which, it was a good and decent practice when I got there, but two things happened almost concurrently, and one of them also kind of changed my life. Dave Hyman got hired to file a Chapter 11 case for Federated Department Stores, which at the time was the largest Chapter 11 ever filed, and so that consumed him. And then, very shortly thereafter, or maybe even before Federated was filed, through a connection with Jones Day's partner in the New York office, we got introduced to Carl Icahn, who owned and was the CEO of TWA Airlines. And so Dave and I went out to meet Carl. Carl said we're going to have dinner at 6 in his dining room. We got there at 6. Carl walked in at 9:30. After we sat there for 3.5 hours, we stayed till I think 2 o'clock in the morning, yelling and screaming. And if anybody who's dealt with Carl, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We get in the car. He was up in Mount Kisco back then. We're driving back to the city, and Dave said, "David, this is your case now, because I am not going back into that thing with Carl Icahn." And so there I was. I wasn't even 40 years old, and Dave, just tell Carl I'm not available if he says he wants to talk to me. And so here I am, first chair on what was when we filed it, one of the 10 biggest Chapter 11 cases ever. So I leave Jones Day, I go to Skadden, you and I, Jack. This was our, we had a great 3 years together. I thought, I have found my home. I am going to retire as a Skadden partner. I absolutely love it here. But guess what? Everything I'm working on, Lazard is the investment banker, and this guy, Terry Savage, and I get to be great friends. And one day he takes me out to lunch and says, I think you'd be a really good investment banker. Why don't you come and try it? We just brought Jim Milstein over from Cleary, and he's doing great, and we think you would do great too. I had never even thought about, are you kidding me? Why would anyone hire me as an investment banker? Trust me, it's going to be okay. So I went and I talked to Bob Sheehan, who was the managing partner of Skadden, and he said, look, go try it. You can always come back here. We'd be happy to take you back. So I went over to Lazard in 2002, and as much as I loved practicing law for 21 years, that's how much I loved investment banking. And so my peripatetic life of law firms ended. I spent 21 years at Lazard, became the head of the group in 2012. And then, so that's my second career. And then the third career, back in 1986, somebody introduced me to this guy who's my age, Jeff Heckman, who's trying to break in the liquidation business. This company, Hilco, he's the only employee of Hilco. I met him. He laid out his whole theory of the company he wanted to build. I thought, this is a really good guy, very smart guy, but he has no chance of being successful whatsoever because you can't break into the liquidation business. It's controlled by this cadre of mafia-like families. So you see how right I was about that. But once you meet Jeff, you know him for life. We stay in touch. We have lunch in June, thinking about what's next after Lazard. He says, why don't you come to Hilco? We're about to embark upon the next evolutionary phase of the company. We're going to bring in a new investor. We're going to raise capital. We're going to do this and that. I said, that sounds amazing. Yeah, let's do it. So we shook hands at the table. I hadn't even talked to anybody about life after Lazard, and that's how I got to Hilco. So I guess the common theme is that, life kind of showed me the way from step to step. I never thought I would leave law to do banking. I never thought that, of all things, that I would end up with, Jeff Heckman, and then, bonus being with Jamie too, at Hilco. But, here I am on career number 3. And, the old adage, when you love what you're doing, you don't have to work a day of your life. That's how I feel about my career, because each one of these steps I've enjoyed just as much as the one that preceded it.
So having gotten to know you all a little bit better in the last half hour or so, we have the head of one of the leading advisory practices, one of the major investment banks. We have one of the major law firm heads in the country, and we now have, in your role as vice chairman of Hilco, somebody who's, I don't know, you and Jamie, how many businesses you guys have now? 23, 24 verticals? That keeps changing by the day. So a couple dozen verticals.
Okay, Jack, you're behind the times. That's old Hilco, right?
Yeah.
No.
Well, no, I know that it's all been rolled up into one group that you run and one group someone else runs.
Sure,
but,
right.
But the verticals, I think, are still actively working. But you're doing that. But tell us in the concept of this. I want to sort of ask a couple of hot topics. And ask how you're all thinking about them, because I think you all do think about them. Let's first talk about the capital markets in the world we're in today, right? This is kind of a crazy world at the moment, right, in terms of what's going on politically across the world. And how do you think about the capital markets both today and over, say, the next 12 to 18 months, as you're thinking about both accessing them and helping people access them? We'll just go right down the line. Jim, start with you.
Yeah, great topic to bring up, and I think you have some fantastic perspective here between capital allocators and folks like me who are the intermediary trying to remain relevant in a world that is moving so quickly and capital markets that are moving so quickly. So for us, as Stifel has a robust equity capital markets practice, a full-on fixed income capital markets desk. So we get to see how the markets are operating. At the same time, what we're finding certainly around our space is the capital markets are combining, and they're looking. We have clients who are looking for capital, as well as capital providers who are looking for integrated solutions. Right? They're looking for capital solutions. They're looking for the opportunity to put creative capital to work in new structures, in whether that's effectively secured equity in some situations, whether it's debt with complex warrant features and structured finance. And so for us as an investment bank and an intermediary, the key thing is to try to remain and become as flexible as possible to meet those needs. So one of the things we're doing, is we used to be Miller Buckfire. Now we're Stifel Capital Structure Advisory. We're part of a broader capital solutions mandate where we're constantly talking to our colleagues on the equity capital markets desk as well as the fixed income capital markets desk to try to find what the right product is for the client's needs. As far as and it's a volatile market right now, but I think what we continue to see, even with private capital, private debt having issues, is just there's trillions on the sideline in corporate balance sheets and cash accounts, as well as investors. So there's going to continue to be this robust demand for product that is going to drive these best deals and drive deals that are still going to continue to have less investor protection than we all may have been comfortable with like 2 decades ago. Those things are going to continue to perpetuate. David?
I think that, so we're going to talk about capital markets. Well, I think we're on the precipice of something really major that is about to happen. Now, how large and significant it will prove to be in relation to, other major dislocations in the capital markets and the financial world remains to be seen. But and look, I told you what I thought about Jeff Heckman's prospects for success, so don't ever listen to me when I'm talking about the future. But I think that we are, private credit is about to go through a major period of turmoil. And, when you look at the history of private credit over the last several years, it seems so clear that this avalanche of money, pouring into private credit. Every quarter you hear Ares just raised another $20 billion and Apollo raised private credit. Well, it's great to raise all of those dollars, and of course the incentives to raise the AUM is there because, these are fee-based businesses, so the more AUM you capture, the more money you make. But now you have to deploy that capital, you have to put it to work. And so I think we've all seen in various aspects of what we do for a living is that inevitably credit standards decline when there is pressure to deploy capital, and here the pressure to deploy capital was enormous. There has never been a reset, if you will, of credit standards in private credit since private credit, really got going. It hasn't happened at all. So that people who are underwriting these credits, these loans, making decisions, most of them had never lived through a 2008 or a down cycle. And so, when you read some of the statistics, like, well, we put out $100 billion of credit and our default rate is 0.3%. Okay, that's just not possible for that to be sustained for a period of time. And so I don't know when it's, usually there's a match that triggers things, although First Brands and some of the others, could be the tip of the spear. You see, if you read the Financial Times every other day, there's a story about LPs, now retail investors too, pulling money out of private credit. You're starting to see, boy, this sounds a lot like 2008 again, where funds are close to redemptions, so that redemptions have hit their caps. I think Blue Owl, not to pick on Blue Owl at all, but I was just reading something about them where the percentage of their loans that are picking at the moment is well into the 20% range. So that's what I foresee. I mean, when Jamie Dimon says that there's never one it's never one cockroach, he's right. And I think the CEO of Sixth Street just said the other day, next few years are going to be really bumpy. So that's what I'm thinking a lot about. What is that going to look like? How is it going to play out? How is it going to manifest itself? Who are the in every one of these things where there are big losers, there are also big winners too. People who played the other side of the equation. And so who are going to be the big losers? Who are going to be the big winners? And I don't know. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Kevin?
Yeah, just briefly, it's something David said that reminds me. In each of these inflection points that we go through, in the early 80s, it was a combination of ACRS, Accelerated Cost Recovery System, which was public policy, combined with passive active loss restrictions, loosening so that you could invest and take losses against your active income, and that expressed itself in the savings and loan crisis because people were investing not for value, they were investing to reduce their tax obligations. And then you go into dot-com, telecom, Y2K, a lot of speculation. 08, 09, all of these instances have sort of certain triggers that are indicia. One, the run-up to whether it's redemption requests and redemption caps in private credit, public policy, a loosening of due diligence and investigation rigor that looks into the quality of the credit, CMBS, RMBS, all that kind of thing, and external forces, whether it's crises, war, public policy, whatever, and you can't catch a falling knife, you can't predict when things are happening. You just know intuitively there are all these little indicia that are suggesting that the ordinary course, the regular order is under stress, and when that happens, people flee. People have to flee, right? They have obligations, their fiduciary duties, so people flee to safety, but at some point there's not enough high ground. Tsunami's coming, there's only so much. So you can't predict it. I just know that some of the indicia I've seen over my career and lifetime and some that I participated in, I'm hearing those echoes, and I'm hoping that we have enough learning to adjust accordingly. The one saving grace, I'm looking at the title of the program, The Long Game of Leadership and Resilience, is that the economy is remarkably, people are going to buy toilet paper and dishwashing liquid no matter what, right? So when I started the financial crisis, Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, Dow Jones Industrial was 1,000. It was up to 50. Okay, for most of you, some of you in the audience, to your lifetime, it's going to go up to 70. But there are always adjustments, and we may be on the edge of one of those in some fashion. The hows and whys and whens is yet to be determined.
So at Birch Lake, our private capital advisory firm, we spend most of our time working with entrepreneurs and founders and growth businesses. And every one of them, to a person, is a forward early adopter of AI. To the point that when we think about strategy or when we think about getting together and talking about what's next in a particular transaction, usually the first thing on the table is a 10-page reiteration of what Saul thinks or Carlos thinks or whatever they have named their own AI agent who they've spoken with and they had an evening with the night before, and they put that on the table and say, this is what we think we should do, right? Leaving our conversation as sort of a secondary. So prove to me why Saul's wrong. Not what do you think we should do, Jack, but why is Saul not right? right? So it's a different conversation, and this is almost every conversation. So very briefly, I want to ask you all, very briefly, in your firms, how are you dealing with AI? How are you hiring 180 people next year in first years across your organization, Kevyn, with artificial intelligence and clients like us who say, I don't want to pay for them, and they're becoming redundant, and I want you guys to get smarter, faster. How are you dealing with it? So each of you, very briefly, if you just tell me, how are your firms doing it, and what do you think about AI in a practical sense?
Briefly, I think it's here. I think we have to adapt. I think there are going to be challenges with the ecosystem. There's no canon of ethics regarding the use of AI for lawyers. There's no canonical law in terms of the circuit courts regarding what happens when you use of AI and what does that mean for a covenant default that was implanted. There's no codicil malpractice insurer forgiving you for the use of AI in case of incident. So we're building the plane as we're flying it, but we are adapting, and we are making sure that we're able to address the client's needs and benefit from those efficiencies because it's here. I think it is going to be net-net, it's going to be positive and additive, but I think we're still evolving to a degree. But we have to because it's the technology of the future.
David?
I don't have much to add other than to agree with that. We have a formal AI initiative at Hilco with, certainly I'm not part of that initiative because I would have nothing to add to it. But there's very little in our business where our business says, our practices, where there isn't a fairly obvious AI angle to it, right? Whether it's, well, here's an opportunity to save costs or efficiencies, or, well, how are we going to interact in a world where everybody, like what you were saying, Jack, or your clients, and right, it's all kind of conversations are beginning with, well, here's what AI thinks about it. I'm going to watch this with great interest and fun, and feeling good that I don't have to be the one to figure this out. But in fact, I was just reading on the plane down, if you want to insulate yourself from AI, tell your kid to be a plumber, because there will always be, the plumber needs to be the plumber, and there's no way for AI to impact that. Here at Hilco, everything we do is going to be impacted by AI, and I'm going to really enjoy watching this transformation, and that's about all I have to say, because I feel I'd probably be the last person that should be making those decisions. But we're very focused on it, and now being part of Oryx, they are, of course, very focused on it too. So how do you implement? What's the right angle? That's a big topic of conversation.
We're a services firm, so we're very focused on what how AI is going to change the investment banking model. Our recruiting classes, so folks coming out of college, coming out of business school. Right now, we're guided towards about 60% of the level of hires that we've had previously. We think that the people that we bring in are going to be sufficiently productive using AI tools, both general tools as well as a particular contractor that we've stress tested and hired to provide all the services that we need to go to our clients. I will say it's making us better bankers, faster bankers. Using it directly, we're finding better information and additional information to put into our confidential information memorandum that provides buyers with better statistics and better knowledge that we might not have otherwise found around a particular situation. It's assisting us with correcting our work, with finding gaps in models, all these different things, and we'll have to see. We're still gonna need these junior bankers, but they're going to have to be, and they're arriving to us. They're arriving to us with far more AI competency than I would have imagined. Like they're ready to do it. They're ready to drive the car when previously we were all kind of leading the horses when it comes to what it's doing for investment banking right now.
So we always end these conversations, these luncheon conversations with our award winners by ending with a note of mentorship and asking you all to reflect. Not only you all have had extraordinary careers, that's why M&A Advisor is bestowing the industry's highest recognition on you this evening. But there are also people in this audience and people listening on the webcast and others, who are starting out in their careers or are young leaders who are in their 30s and 40s, trying to do the things you did when you were at that age. What, if you had to distill it down in a few words of advice, what advice would you give people that you think would help them be more successful in their careers? Jim?
Oh, there's a lot. We can go to a lot of different directions with this. I think this is a career restructuring is this wonderful ecology of there's a lot of us, but we know we've worked together with so many others. We build that trust. We build those relationships, and I think for my bankers who are starting up, I'm just constantly reminding them to go beyond the work and really think about who are you and what is your personal franchise. Right? I've got to get their heads out of Excel and focused on the relationships and who the mid-level individuals and professionals are at the other firms, and like getting the coffee with them and talking to them and understanding sort of who they are. The other thing is getting people comfortable with saying I don't know the answer to that, but here's the things that I think will go into the answer. And recognizing that expertise can come in that way, not just saying the answer is 3, but what's the thinking process behind it? Because the other person may have the other piece of the tool that's going to help us get to the answer.
David?
I'd say number 1, only do what you love. If you don't love this, don't do it. Go find something else, because you're going to burn out, and 100% that's the way it's going to end. Number 2, it's not about the money every day. And I have to say, I feel like this is something that's changed radically from, back when we started, where it was never, I just want to be at the firm that pays me the most money, and what firm, although practice of law and other professions kind of evolved into that, it was, we wanted to be the best lawyers that we could possibly be. We want to be the best investment bankers we can possibly be. You want to be the best appraiser at Hilco that you could possibly be. The money will follow. It always does. If you're great at what you do and you focus on being great at what you do, then it always follows. And then I'd say number 3, this maybe is the part of it that gave me the most pleasure, is to focus on what's really going on in a deal, on a situation. And sometimes you can get so wrapped up in the numbers and the math and the basis points and the yields, and this is trading at this and this is trading at that. But I think many times when you're myopically focused on these things in a situation, you're missing the most important part, which is the interpersonal dynamics that are driving all of this stuff. Right? That's where the fun is. So why is he acting that way? Why is she oh, well, I can tell you why he's acting that way, because he just lost $100 million. Like, when you really understand what's going on and what's driving decisions and what are people's motivations, and look, we're not robots, right? So emotion, even people who think that they are robotic in how they approach financial decision making, emotion is a huge part of it. Subconsciously, they don't even know it. And so I think you're so much more effective as a professional, and it's so much more fun and interesting if you step back and really look at the full mosaic of what's in front of you, rather than just focusing on whatever little piece of this you're hired to do.
Kevyn, you have the last word.
Just 3 quick things. Number 1, most of us don't know what we know. And by that I mean, until you get into an environment and grow from a boutique firm to going into 2 major law firms to going to Hilco to becoming vice chair, nobody saw that coming. I didn't see where I am coming, so you don't know what you know. Number 2, run to the fire. If there's a challenge, if there's a widowmaker matter, if somebody else thinks it can't be done, embrace the fact that it can be done. It's just up to you to figure out how to do it. It's just that simple. You get it done. The third thing I would say is, I wake up every morning thankful that I live in a country that is 5% of the population of the world, 25-30% of its GDP, but gives us the opportunity to invest, to become lawyers, participate in the equity of America and to thrive in that situation. I read a study this weekend, 8 billion people in the world, 6 billion, that's 75%, live in autocratic regimes. They don't have that opportunity. It means a vast majority of the world does not have the opportunity you have. And for me, that is tremendously empowering because it says I have a benefit that the vast majority of the other human beings on this earth do not have, and therefore I have an obligation to exploit it. And that drives me every day. I tell my kids that every day. Okay? You have a gift you don't recognize. As you travel around, I call them boat slopes, coast, and clubs kids. They go skiing, they hang out at the beach, they hang around. That's a benefit you have that a lot of people don't. So lean into that, protect it, and exploit it to the highest you can. And if you can do a little public service on the way to give back, so.
Ladies and gentlemen, our 2026 Lifetime Achievement and Leadership Award winners. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
We hope today's episode delivered actionable intelligence. We want to hear from the field. Share your questions or insights, leave a message on your favorite platform, or email us at editor@maadvisor.com. To secure your steady feed of premium M&A content, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts email newsletter. Find the links in the description below or visit us directly at our website at www.maadvisor.com. I'm Roger Aguinaldo, founder and CEO of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for being part of the M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay decisive, stay connected, and happy dealing.